We're getting to know many organizations these days doing incredible work in different fields, and one of them is Tzalash, in short, giving spiritual and emotional support for religious soldiers and their families, which is super important these days. And joining me now in studio is Tzalash Managing Director, Rabbi David Gottlieb. David, hi. Great having you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing?
Okay, as can be expected under the circumstances.
Of course. Now, before we dive into what you guys are doing during the war, what is Tzalash? What does it actually mean? And really, what do you do in everyday life?
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. Tzalash is a Roshei Tevot, or an acronym, Tzadik Lamed Shin, Tzava L'Shem Shamayim. That, in Hebrew, basically means the army for the sake of heaven, which more colloquially I could explain means that we are an organization which is dedicated to the religious and emotional support of the soldiers. Many of the soldiers, a high percentage of the established Israeli army, come from religious homes. And we aim to work in concert with the army to provide them religious support so that they can be the best soldiers that they can be, but at the same time not compromising their religious commitment. Similarly, soldiers have emotional challenges. It's a very demanding work, even not at wartime. So we provide counseling and support for them. And lastly, we have an additional division called Eshet Chayil, which is a division which refers to the women of valor. And that alludes to the wives of the soldiers. And even before the war, we had over 350 married couples where the husband is serving full-time in the army. And we provide various forms of emotional support, religious support for their wives who have a very difficult situation where a week or two at a time, their husband is out of the house doing demanding or even dangerous job. And therefore, we are there for them, their families, and for the soldiers themselves, religious and emotional support.
Wow, that's a beautiful idea. Now, do you know the numbers, perhaps? Like, what numbers are we talking about? Because, you know, religious soldiers in the army, very specific. Do you know the numbers?
It's a good question. I'm hesitant to give an exact number only because how do you define religious? Masorti, not Masorti, this religious, that religious. I believe it may be as much as a third of the army. I don't know the numbers in the Miluim, in the reserves, but in the current serving army, a very high percentage of religious Jews, primarily from the religious Zionist community, but also we're seeing now even more and more from the Haredi community, but certainly from the religious Zionist community, a very high percentage are serving, and I believe it may be up to a third of the entire army.
We also see many want to draft. We saw it just this morning. Now, David, a little bit about your story. You made an aliyah in your mid-30s. I mean, is that right?
Yes, correct.
And how did you get to be involved in sort of like an army organization for the soldiers? How did you get into that world, actually?
That's a very good question. And the answer is very simply, my oldest son. He went to a Hesder yeshiva. That's a yeshiva, a rabbinical seminary, you could call it, a religious yeshiva, which combines studying religious texts, religious items in yeshiva, and serving in the army. And when he went into the army as a family of Olim, as you said, I didn't serve in the army, obviously. We came to Israel when I was in my mid-30s. And you know that it's a little bit dangerous. You are worried for your child's physical safety.
From abroad, everything looks like bigger
Exactly.
and crazier.
But when you finally have someone who goes into the army, you realize it's not so simple to be religious. Not because the army is antagonistic, God forbid. They try to be as supportive as possible, but simply the demands of the army, which are incredible, the amount of time and effort, the exhaustion of the soldiers, even without war, it's very hard to maintain a regular schedule of prayer and of Torah study. And I saw the challenge of my son. And my son introduced me to Tzalash because he benefited a lot from their services. So like any parent who had gratitude, hakarat hatov, I started volunteering to help Tzalash. And when my son was already almost out of the army, the founder of Tzalash, Rabbi Peretz Einhorn, approached me and he encouraged me to join and become his partner in the Menahel, or the managing director. So we got to it beautifully, yes, through my son's service. And now even though my son was out of the army, now he's back in reserves. He was drafted on Simchat Torah like so many. But I got to it through my son and having hakarat hatov, gratitude for what they were doing. And I saw the challenge, but that Tzalash knows how to answer the challenge.
Yes, amazing. Now we're 2 weeks into the war. You're saying your son is also there in reserves. What is Tzalash doing to help during these difficult times? And also, if you want to help, you donate, do something for Tzalash, what can we do and how can we do it?
So thank you for asking. So obviously, the second the war began after Simchat Torah, we mobilized. Now we were challenged because many of the male staff members, other than me, virtually, were also called up. Most of our staff is now in reserves and on the front lines. Many of the women who I work with, their husbands or their sons are now also on the front lines. So on the one hand, we have a skeletal staff. On the other hand, demands are Incredible. So now there are thousands and thousands of extra new soldiers who we're trying to help. And we have, I mentioned, 350 women that we were helping. In the first day, we had 2,500 women who signed up for our services. Wow. Now over 4,000. So we are doing, broadly speaking, two things. Number one is we are trying as much as possible, I myself, but not only me, visiting as many Army bases as possible, not only to give emotional support, but also bringing huge backpacks that weigh over 40 pounds filled with holy books, tefillin, Torah, sidurim, prayer books, psalm books, tehillim, tzitziot, filled to give them out to the various units.
Something many people are going back to these days. We're seeing also non-religious people.
Yes, it's incredible. Part of the mission of Tzalash is we don't coerce, we don't force. So we're there for the religious soldiers, but what we're finding in the war more than we ever had in our history is people who might not identify as religious, but they want a tehillim. They want tzitzit. I've put tefillin on people who never put on tefillin before. Not because I pushed, but because they asked.
People want it.
Yes.
Now we really want to get it in really quickly. How can we really donate? How can we help Tzalash to help
Thank you. Yes. So we're helping these 4,000 women. We're also helping the soldiers. And if they would like, we would be happy if they could join. I know there's going to be a QR code on the screen. And we have a special campaign to help the emotional support we're giving for the women who are not behind the scenes, but they're very important and have a difficult time, as well as all these packages and gifts and visits that we're making to the soldiers on the front line. They can visit our website, tzalash.org, and they can follow the QR code to the special campaign for this emergency campaign for the war.
David, you have an amazing initiative, an amazing organization. Tzalash, thank you so much for joining us today. Stay safe during these times. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and you should stay safe as well.
Thank you so much.